Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. I think some people thought that would never be a reality, and others thought that would have been a reality since 2 decades ago. But how exactly has his government held up according to the standards that he himself has proposed or had proposed as leader of the opposition? And joining me here today, we have three excellent speakers, very well-known, very well-published speakers, academics who will be talking about the Reformasi record of Malaysia's transactional unity government. And I'm Walid Jumlat Abdullah. I'll be your moderator for today's session. So let's get right into it. Before that, I just wanted to say that today's event is organized by the Sydney Southeast Asia Center. So thank you so much. In collaboration with MASA, the Malaysian Singapore Society of Australia. And basically, we will be discussing Anwar Ibrahim and the unity government's 100-day record. And let's begin with Professor Nazri. He's a senior lecturer now, Dr. Nazri. He is a senior lecturer at University Kebangsaan Malaysia, and he has been making a lot of media appearances, and I've been following them, and they have been excellent, an excellent way for me to keep up with the nitty-gritty of Malaysian politics as well. So, Dr. Nazri, how exactly do you see the ideological convergence or divergence of the respective parties within the unity government?
All right. Thank you, Walid, University of Sydney, and also Masa for having me here. Yeah, it will be a long answer to that, Dr. Walid. Let's see, the situation of 2-3 years ago, and since the Sheraton move, which happened in early 2020, despite of the talks of Anwar, and the president of People Justice Party, the PKR, and Zahid, the president of UMNO, the National Front, BN, coalition since the late 2020, most pundits believe the two parties could not work together. After all, the PKR and its coalition, the Pakatan Harapan, ideology is based on reform, multiracialism, and liberalism, whereas BN is the opposite, and it is an authoritarian successor party. So during the general election 2022 held last year in November, many believe that it will be either BN or PH that would secure simple majority to form the new government. They in fact were competing against one another in the election. But less than an hour after the Election Commission of Malaysia announced the result at the wee hours on the 20th November 2022, that there was no clear winner in the election, Anwar made a public statement that he has the simple majority and would like to seek audience with the heads of states. So the plan B, PKR, PH, and UMNO, BN working together, should PKR or BN not be able to secure the number, was already planned before the elections. This could be the reason why Anwar had straight away agreed with the suggestion made by His Majesty Head of States on forming a unity government few days after the result. Does Anwar mean business in the 2022 election? It was like now or never. It was perhaps a choice between maintaining your principle, making noise, but not able to do something significant to the nation, and as you are an opposition, or be dragged through the mud in grabbing power to be able to lead and enacting reforms, no matter how difficult. After all, the Malay element in PH is weak. It's not only difficult for the PH to make a breakthrough without the support of popular Malay conservative elite, but the government will not be that stable as well. Thus, I see, though the unity government is far from an ideal type government, especially when we talk about healthy, ideological, and programmatic competition among parties, but within the context of Malaysian politics and society, where there is politicization of culture and culturalizations of politics, constitutionalism and political cooperation between the main divides is pragmatically needed, and at least in this transitional time. So after the long period of authoritarianism under the Barisan Nasional rule and the short period of history of liberalism under the first PH administration 2018-2020, this unity government of a strange bedfellows is the middle path in the Malaysian political transitions, perhaps. But at what cost? The Anwar's administration is seen cautious about reform. It attempts not to repeat the mistakes in the first by the first PH administrations. Until today, most of the head of departments in the civil service are kept, and they are yet an announcement of any major policy change, except for the introduction of the new national ideology, the Madani or Civil Malaysia, last January. Anwar administration is also seen to have downplayed its electoral manifesto, including the 2018 enticing manifesto of Buku Jingga or the Orange Book. For example, the Parliamentary Committee of Major Appointment in the public service is still dysfunctional. It is still dysfunctional. Anwar himself is now helming the Ministry of Finance, in which he had aggressively criticized against such practice in the past. He appointed one of his daughters as one of his economic advisors, despite public uproar. It is also difficult for Anwar's administration to be part away from the previous practices, as a number of old elites within the unity government are holding various cabinet positions, the most important sources of patronage in Malaysia. At the same time, nevertheless, by holding the concurrently the positions as the Minister of Finance, Anwar is in the right place to check against cronyism and nepotism, although rather bizarrely, particularly in the process of channeling lucrative state funds from various ministries to business contractors, usually politically connected. Ideologically, many BN supporters, mostly Malays, felt cheated by Zahid when a pact with PH was made to form unity government. Their votes for BN were mostly anti-PH vote. Many might change loyalty to Perikatan Nasional, the Muhyiddin leads political coalition with Islamic Party of Malaysia, PAS, if Anwar's reform, especially on the economic well-being of the people, is not well felt on the ground. Most of non-Malays are much more acceptable with unity government for now. The Anwar's administration is practically a minority government, although it is, as what Walid said, transactionally supported by majority of Malaysian parliamentarians. It needs to strengthen its royal mandate with performance-based mandate and cultural-based mandate, and that's perhaps we could see the reason why Anwar, like to wear baju Melayu from time to time to show that the national ideology, culture is still there, Malay lead. And his first speech as the Prime Minister, he assured to the people about the important positions of the Malay culture, language, and so on. In conclusion, for this first round, perhaps I see reform in Malaysia is still long way ahead, even under the unity government led by Anwar. And the state is still trapped in the grey zone between a weak democracy and soft authoritarianism. Over to you, Walid.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nazri. That was a sober and somber, I guess, assessment of reform in Malaysia currently, and especially what you said about royal-based legitimacy versus cultural and performance legitimacy. That's such an important point. Also, I wanted to pick out on the part about reform. There's the hesitation that you mentioned to reform as fast as a lot of people want them to because of what happened in the 2018 Pakatan Harapan government. But there's also the own goals that you mentioned, which maybe signifies a lack of seriousness about reform. in terms of the finance ministry and also appointing the daughter and so on. And that's really a good segue to our next speaker's segment, Dr. Lily Zubaida. Dr. Lily is an honorary fellow at Georgetown University, and just on a personal note, as an undergrad, she was one of my idols, especially her book on Singapore, the Singapore Dilemma, that remains as a classic. So, Dr. Lily, I wanted to ask you, based on what Dr. Nazri has just said, what do you see are the potential fault lines of this government? Can a government that rests on a lack of ideological and principled uniformity, can this government last? Dr. Lily?
Well, that is the $1 million ringgit question. Will this government last? I think based on their performance so far, one has good reasons to feel somewhat upbeat and optimistic. But before I go on, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Malaysia and Singapore Society of Australia and the Sydney Southeast Asian Centre at Sydney University for staging this webinar, and of course, Dr. Walid for hosting this event. So, selamat petang and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Now, with regard to the question you posed to me, Dr. Walid, we need to consider the serious structural and ideational fault lines in this Pakatan Harapan-led unity government. As already noted by Dr. Nazri, it would appear that this government lacks firm ideological coherence. It's made up of a motley group of political parties that have never worked, some of whom have never worked with one another. So this lack of firm ideological coherence, and also, I might add, a firm commitment to the democracy reform agenda, which Pakatan Harapan was most elaborately outlined in its election manifesto. Now, also there is a lack of coherent, consensual commitment to the constitutional foundations of Malaysia's post-colonial state, the democratic constitutional foundations. Now, I think we need to, having said that, we need to recognize that the judicious vision of the founding nationalists of Malaysia, Tunku Abdul Rahman, Tunku Abdul Razak, Tun Ismail, Hussein On, and others. They essentially established Malaysia as a multiracial nation based on equal citizenship rights for all Malaysians. They believed that was the sustainable way forward for the multi-ethnic, multi-religious country. So the constitution, if we read the Malaysian constitution, it is based strongly on citizenship rights, liberal, political, democratic rights. Unfortunately, Malaysia has strayed from this inclusive nation building vision of the founding fathers and mothers, I might add, especially after the race riots of 1969 with the implementation of the never-ending new economic policy, and also the implementation of very conservative interpretations of Islam, state-led Islamization from the 1980s. And I highlight here not Islam per se, but conservative interpretations of Islam. And I argue in various publications that what Malaysians need to consider is to seriously return to the inclusive vision of the founding nationalists. In particular, also the principles of the national ideology, the inclusive national ideology, the Rukun Negara. And I might also add that other opposition leaders, such as the late Nick Aziz, also held that inclusive vision for Malaysia and Malaysians. And one could argue that that is not necessarily the case within the past leadership. So we are living very much, I believe, in a historical moment in Malaysia's history, in Malaysia's historical trajectory. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim is the first Malaysian Prime Minister elected from a multiracial party, PKR. And this is in itself a significant step, I believe, in overcoming the baggage of divisive racial and religious politics, which has taken root from the, one could argue, the 70s and the 80s. Now, so what about this narrative that has been articulated by Prime Minister Anwar and this new Pakatan Harapan-led unity government? There is a narrative which dovetails, which parallels with the founding vision of Malaysia's nationalists. And that is the Malaysia Madani narrative or agenda. And not much flesh has been articulated as yet, but we find clear signals as to the direction and substance of Malaysia Madani. And when Anwar was an opposition leader, he did articulate Masyarakat Madani quite rigorously many decades ago. Now, there has been a focus on economic policy reforms. However, I would argue that you can walk and chew gum as well. You can do both. You can focus on the economics, but one should not neglect the social policy reforms, particularly those geared towards nation building and inclusive nation building based on equal citizenship rights, uniting Malaysians, fomenting or forging a Malaysian national identity, a united and cohesive Malaysian national identity. So we look forward to the more rigorous articulation of Malaysia Madani. Now, I would also argue that this is actually the right time for a reformist push, the reformist agenda, Masyarakat Madani, and so on. If we look at the polls, the more credible surveys and polls that have been carried out, particularly by, say, the Merdeka Center. In a poll conducted late last year, in December 2022, it found that a significant proportion of Malaysians surveyed, close to 70%, believed that supported Anwar. So the rating was 68% of Malaysians surveyed supported Anwar, and perhaps that has since dropped. But nevertheless, that is quite a robust figure. Now, they also found, the Merdeka survey also found that 83% of respondents favored the Agong in appointing Anwar as the 10th Prime Minister of Malaysia. So there is some level of consensus there in Anwar's appointment. 77% believe that this government can bring about stability and inclusiveness to the regions, to the country's politics. So they are, quite encouraging survey results. And if we read the survey carefully, what is troubling is that these upbeat perspectives tend to be held by the minority communities rather than the Malay community. Now, there is much focus and attention on tackling corruption, and that is very much needed. Obviously, in Malaysia, Transparency International's survey, the 2022 Corruption Perception Index survey, revealed that Malaysia's corruption standing has worsened since the PN government and the Ismail Sabri government. This is very instructive. And the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index survey actually showed that there was some improvement during the short tenure of the Pakatan Harapan government. So it's interesting that this Transparency International 2022 survey found that, and this resonates with Malaysia as well, leaders from the ASEAN, Southeast Asian region emphasized economic recovery at the expense of systematically tackling corruption. So this is a lesson for Malaysia, I think. The other lesson from the TI index is that most countries that are chronically corrupt and possess this culture of kleptocracy tend to be authoritarian regimes. This is, another point we need to consider. Now, 3 countries that have declined in their ranking, Malaysia is one of them of most concern to us, Mongolia and Pakistan. So with regard to tackling corruption, obviously the institutions, laws, and so on need to be there and also need to be implemented. No use having lovely sounding institutions and laws, but they're not enforced. So, these have to go together. Many observers have noted the importance of political funding laws, election funding laws, and related laws. What's been in the news recently is the importance of government contracts to the tune of billions of dollars in particular. They should be transparent, based on a transparent tender process. Judiciary in particular needs to be kept independent and autonomous in order for Malaysia to deepen its democratic processes and institutions. And I believe the Chief Justice of Malaysia, Tengku Maimun, has done quite a sterling job with attempting to maintain the judicial independence. Now, I think I'm running out of time, so I'll just end off by making a few other points. Now, there has been some disappointment with regard to the reform agenda of this government, particularly if we focus on the budget. In particular, reforms to the MACC, the Anti-Corruption Commission. Many believe that reforms to this commission needs to be more rigorous. It needs to be accountable, in particular to Parliament. And many of these points were highlighted, in fact, in Pakatan Harapan's manifesto. And the National Anti-Corruption Plan needs to be given a kickstart I believe, and also draconian legislation inherited from past governments, such as SOSMA. They need to seriously consider this in the near future. Now, back again to Prime Minister Anwar. On the night he was appointed Prime Minister by the Agong, he highlighted that, reminded and assured Malaysians that the position of Islam will be protected as it is enshrined in the federal constitution, the rights of Malays also to be protected. But he also hastened to add, and I quote Prime Minister Anwar here, "I want to stress that I am the Prime Minister for Malaysians of all races so that we can unite the country as one." So that we can unite the country as one. So this gave us the flavor of what's to come, Malaysia Madani, a return to a kind of wasatiyah Islam that was purported by the previous Barisan Nasional government. I think I've run out of time, but I want to end off my presentation by making an important point, and that is how some political observers and some politicians, particularly in the opposition, have spoken brazenly and boldly about toppling this elected government through non-electoral means. That is of concern. We need to take their I believe you can use the term threats, these threats seriously, and perhaps I can elaborate on some of these points during the Q&A. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Lily. And if Dr. Nazri's assessment was more sober, I think Dr. Lily's was more upbeat. And maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, and we can discuss that during the Q&A. Let's discuss something more specific and something that is often not talked about, which is environmental reform in Malaysia. And I think we have the perfect person to do that today, Dr. Helena Varki, an associate professor in environmental politics at the University of Malaya. Do you see, and I think that can be a microcosm, or maybe it's not, a microcosm of institutional reform in general. Do you see things which have happened in the past 100 days that gives you cause for optimism?
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Walid, and thank you to MASA as well as University of Sydney, which is my alma mater as well. And I'm especially honored to speak following Dr. Lily, who many years ago was my PhD supervisor. So very happy to be able to share the panel with her today. It's the first time I have the opportunity to do this. So as Walid has mentioned, I work on the issues of environmental politics. So I will try and contextualize my comments. I wouldn't say that I'm very extremely well versed with Malaysian politics per se, but in terms of environmental politics, I will contextualize my comments on the unity government's performance on two areas of political importance for the nation, as well as on the global level, which is climate change and palm oil. So I'm going to talk about three main points. One is in the context of the manifesto promises, the second in terms of the politics of institutional reform, and then the importance of stability in the context of the environment. So in terms of the first point on manifesto, I'm zeroing it in on what was discussed in the PH manifesto, the most recent one in terms of climate change. So despite what certain former ministers may say, we have to admit that Malaysia is actually highly vulnerable to climate change. So there was a study by the Swiss RE Institute, which ranked Malaysia as second last out of 48 countries in terms of its climate economic impact rankings. So this ranking actually said that we may lose up to 36% of our GDP by 2050 if temperatures rise more than 2 degrees. So this is really important since the focus of the current government is on the economy. So this means that climate is actually an important factor in making sure this can be achieved. The survey also ranked us really low in terms of adaptive capability. So a robust national climate strategy is extremely important for Malaysia. So Malaysia has a climate change policy, and this was back in 2009. And unlike countries like South Korea and New Zealand, we don't have a climate change act. Having a climate change act is even more important than having a policy, because policies can change according to the administration, but an act can be institutionalized, so there can be some continuity. So if we look back a bit, the first PH government put Yeo Bee Yin in charge of the climate. So her ministry started the project of bringing together a climate change act to formalize targets for carbon emissions and forest coverage in Malaysia. After the Sheraton move, fortunately, or as what we were informed is, work continued on this act, but it was not tabled during Tuan Ibrahim's time as a minister. So we are coming now to the most recent, the G15, the PH manifesto. They actually put it in their manifesto that they wanted to finalize and table this act. So this is great. However, Nick Nazmi, which is the current Minister for Climate Change, interestingly, he announced that his ministry is still interested in tabling the act, but it will need at least 3 years to do this. So the minister has justified this by saying there's no point to rush through a toothless act. So this, yes, makes sense. However, there are some issues with this, because from the beginning, there has actually been very little transparency into the contents or the direction of the act. So the public cannot really judge to what extent the act is toothless or not. And under the current administration, unfortunately, we have not been able to get much indication on what aspects did Nick Nazmi find problematic, did his team will be focusing on, and why, most importantly, we need 3 years to actually put all this together. So now I will move on to the second point that I wanted to mention about the politics of institutional reform. And as I would like to put it, who is in charge and so what? So in terms of that, in the environmental scope, one of the first scandals of the unity government was the appointment of Huang Tiong-Si as the Deputy Minister for Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change, so the Deputy Minister of Nick Nazmi. So he was a director of a logging firm, and this logging firm was actually implicated for illegal logging and impingement on the indigenous groups' rights in Barang. So this obviously is an issue for a minister who is supposed to be looking out for the interests of the environment, or a deputy minister. He has since given up his directorship, but of course, you know, the perception of conflicts of interest remains. This is not really something new. There has been similar conflict of interest issues even with the first PH administration, but this kind of optics is not good, or it does not really give a good face for the Reformasi agenda, and also is not contributing well to PH's image of being above patronage politics and corruption and cronyism. Another thing that is worth closer scrutiny is in terms of plantation and commodities. So plantation and commodities is of course very closely linked to the environment, especially in terms of natural resource use and something very important to Malaysia, which is palm oil. So Fadilah Yusof, who is also one of the unity government's deputy prime ministers, he's from Gabungan Party Sarawak. And of course, this appointment can be read as a good faith, in terms of East Malaysia, as playing an important role in the Malaysian sort of political sphere in general. However, the issue comes when Sarawak has been identified as the state with the most expansion potential for oil palm. And this was under Najib's ETP quite some number of years ago, and it was identified that there would possibly be up to 1 million hectares new palm oil in the state. So the PH government has continued to identify palm oil as a key economic sector, even in its recent budget and its manifesto. But the issue actually is linked to bigger global issues. So Malaysia, as most of us will know, is the second largest producer of palm oil in the world. And we, together with Indonesia, we are locked in this long-standing battle with Western markets over palm oil sustainability, or as the West argues, the lack of it. And the current threats to Malaysia and Malaysian palm oil is linked very closely to market access in the EU. So there is the EU Renewable Energy Directive, which may effectively phase out imports of palm oil as biofuels by 2030, and also the recent EU deforestation law, which may block all palm oil imports that are associated with deforestation. So Malaysia has made a lot of strides forward in terms of palm oil sustainability, a lot of improvements, a lot of positive movement. However, at the heart of this problem, this global palm oil politics problem or debate, is an issue of trust between producer countries, Malaysia and Indonesia, and the consumer countries, mainly in the West. So linking back to Sarawak, sustainability in palm oil, one of the key things is calling for more intensification rather than expansion, meaning increasing yield rather than increasing area, because we are very concerned about deforestation and how that's linked to climate as well and to other broader environmental issues. So the optics of a commodities minister coming for a state where the most expansion is likely going to happen is not great either. And this may complicate Malaysia's bargaining position at the global level as well over palm oil politics. So this is something that I hope that that Anwar's government has actually, or Anwar's administration have considered in the larger scheme of things. The final thing I wanted to touch on was the importance of stability for environmental governance. So as we, of course, realize, Malaysia has had a long period of somewhat stability, and then we've had this past years is extremely unstable, or instability has been the reality of our politics here. So stability, or at least institutional continuity, is especially important for issues of environment. So the environment, no surprise, often gets put on the back burner in times of political crisis, in favor of things like economic stability and social security. And there have been studies, like the environmental Kuznets curve. It dictates that pollution and environmental degradation will continue to rise until the society reaches some level of economic prosperity and stability. So we have seen how the changing of ministers and reshuffling of ministry portfolios, for example, Yobin's time was the first time that climate change was given a pride of place in a ministry's name, showing the importance of it. And then when it shifted back to the BN, it was the Ministry of Environment and Water. And now again, we have another combination, which is the Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change. So this obviously have affected the advancements of key legislations like the Climate Change Act that I talked about earlier, as well as other things like the Transboundary Haze Act, which I'm working on as well. So for climate change, we know that time is especially of the essence. Malaysia's nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, to the UNFCCC is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% of GDP intensity by 2030 relative to 2005. So by 2050, While there are inherent problems with the target being based on emissions intensity and not absolute baselines, 2030 is actually only 6.5 years away. So if you need another 3 years to bring the Climate Change Act in place, it means that there's actually very little time to implement it to hit the targets. And also this, as Dr. Lily has mentioned, is also at risk of again being derailed if there are any future political upheavals or toppling of governments. So in conclusion, just based on this sort of microcosm of the environment, ministers like Nid Nazmi and Fadila Yusof carry a big burden on their shoulders. Climate change, has been mentioned many times, is the greatest challenge of our time. And palm oil is especially very important and sensitive to Malaysia. It is basically a minefield of explosive issues like neocolonialism, populism, climate justice. And what is really important is that the ministers, the ministries, they need this breathing room to focus on the portfolios to actually get things done. So instead of all of the party politics that has been really rampant the past few years, and something that their predecessors like Yobin did not have, and for which we all have suffered. So I will end my comments here, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Helena. And she ended with so many teasers: neocolonialism, populism, and so on. And maybe we'll have some time to unpack that during the Q&A. So there are a few questions here, and maybe I'll direct them to you. And by the way, to the audience, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box, and I can see the questions. So maybe we'll take a few at a time. And before that, I also had a question of my own, so I'll just throw it in there, and you, the three of you can choose which questions you want. So first one I wanted to say is the politics of vengeance that we see. Is it justified? Is it not justified? And even if it's justified, how does it bode for the future? If it seems like if this is going to be the trend, and has the door been unlocked because Najib was was charged and arrested? And is this going to happen every single time there is a turnover of government? And has the door to the politics of vengeance been opened such that it cannot be closed again? Okay. So there are a few other questions. So first is, how would the green wave affect reform efforts? And second, to all three of you, what do you perceive to be the top three threats to the current administration? And there is a very specific question: why is Anwar going after people from the Women's March? I'm not sure whether anyone can answer that, but if there is, you feel free to answer that. And then for the next round, we'll go for Mary's question, which is about inclusivity. All right, so Dr. Nazri, you want to go first?
Oh, yeah, sure, Walid. The first one, from your first questions, I think based on what Prof. Lily has mentioned, the problems of ideological incoherence could bring about problems in commitment. After all, reform is in a way owned by PH and PKR rather than the Barisan Nasional. And Anwar administration also, learn from the previous situations when the reforms, is attempted for, too soon, too quick. It might, have backfire the administration as what they did, and Sheraton move in early 2020. And on the political vengeance, on this second questions, I think it is a political dilemma in these transition times in Malaysia, whether to prosecute or to make peace with them. Not to prosecute, Malaysian, we have lost billions and billions due to problems in good governance. But to prosecute or vengeance, things like that, we have seen these were, the main reasons behind the Sheraton move. Because once you beat the oppositions, you might be charged because of the previous practices in terms of how we handle the political economy of the nations. As we see, for example, former leader in Malaysian think tank, when the person venture into politics, he in a way open to these practices, which is quite widespread in Malaysian politics, and he's now been charged in the court of law, at least 2 ground of charges. So they will seek a way out. Personally, they might be charged or have been charged, or indirectly being the opposition members, you could be mistreated. You will not be given, for example, a fair funds to develop your constituency, make things difficult for you to help the people. So changing the government, that's what happened in 2020, in 2021, and later on 2022, when Ismail administration has been pushed by presidents of UMNO, Zahid, to call for a fresh election. And as we know, Zahid was aiming to be the premier actually, but is now at the second best positions. So for me, we need also we also need to think about having a national consensus, because we have seen politics of vengeance, even though it's perhaps about to get even with certain wrongdoers, but it brings about political instability in Malaysia a lot. So we need to think about that as well, and the idea of having national consensus right now. And right now, as the current government is doing something against the opposition, we can see, as what Prof. Lidi said, the attempts to change the government, even though we just have a general election less than 4 months ago, is ongoing right now rather aggressively because a number of charges, and more are coming perhaps. So it will be a response to that. And also I think this is also what Jokowi has practiced in Indonesia, nicely written by Professor Mitzner, fighting illiberalism with illiberalism, and also perhaps what President Erdogan, and both of them are Anwar's good friend, and using state institutions to, in a way, challenge your position, maintain your government and administration. Yeah, it's part and parcel of this current transitional, or perhaps current government in this transitional time. That's what I argue in my conclusion in my first remark, is we still trapped in the gray zone between weak democracy and soft authoritarianism. Walid.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nazri. That was excellent. And Pakatan's theme song during the election, I won't sing it because I cannot sing as well as PM10 can. But it was from Piramli, right? Hoi hoya hoi.
Oh, yeah.
Siapa sokong penyaman? Who supports the robbers? And how are we supposed to take reform seriously when the person you were singing against is now your number 2, right? So what does that portend for the future? But Dr. Lily, top 3 challenges for this government?
Well, I might fuse and integrate all, because they're all pretty much linked to one another. With regard to the politics of the so-called politics of vengeance, I actually don't like that term. It's linked to the narrative of selective persecution, a kind of victimhood narrative. Let's see what the courts have to say about all these cases, all these charges. It's interesting that when the big fish are caught, they make, all these narratives emerge. But when the small fish are caught, it's another narrative. So let's see what the thing is. I think it's important, instead of supporting such narratives, why not focus on ensuring that the judiciary remains robustly, inherently, substantively independent and autonomous? The judiciary, the MACC, and there are a lot of allegations and criticisms hurled at the behavior of the MACC, not just within this administration, but past administrations, where they tend to dance according to the tune of the government in power. So let's not just focus on criticizing the MACC under the tenure of this government. It's got a checkered history, as we all know, and we all remember how the MACC went after a judge who became an appeals court judge after he passed a ruling against a former Malaysian prime minister. They went after him. So this is a long history. In fact, Anwar knows all about this. The judiciary went after Anwar repeatedly when he was leader of the opposition. As a result, he spent about a decade in prison based on charges which many believe are fictitious, made up, and so on. So this is really nothing new. This is typical of political systems that have broken down, democratic processes that have broken down. Let's look at the outcome of the investigations on the literal ships. We all await for that. So I think if there's a serious investigation into this literal ships, then the allegations with regard to politics of vengeance might be attenuated somewhat. Now, the real threat, I believe, to the Pakatan Harapan Unity Coalition government, another Sheraton move. We're still reeling. Some of us are still reeling from the shock of the Sheraton move 2020, and then after that, 2 unelected governments in power which is not good for constitutional democracy. And now we have another elected Pakatan Harapan government in office. And then people are talking about it's okay to get rid of an elected government. Actually, it's not okay. Constitutional scholars would argue, many of them would argue that it's not okay. It doesn't work like this. It shouldn't work like this. The Agong himself has cautioned politicians against this culture of getting rid of elected governments, of this high turnover. It's bad for the political system, it's bad for the economy. Now, with regard to the current government and the fault lines associated with the coalition government, I think UMNO needs to look at itself a little bit more in terms of embarking on its own reformasi or reform agenda. I think the problem here is that when it lost government in 2018, after being in office for more than 6 decades, it didn't really undergo or go through this baptism of fire of internal rethinking within the party in ideational terms, in institutional structural terms, because it hopped back into government with the Sheraton move. So maybe that was not in its long-term interest. There are reformers within the party, in particular younger generation UMNO leaders that have been talking about the importance of substantive reform, not just talking about reform, but substantive reform. Let's hope that UMNO, and not just UMNO, that all the major political parties carry out internal domestic reform. Now, the other fault line, which I didn't touch about, which some of the questionnaires put forward, is the problem to do with ethnic chauvinism, ketuanan Melayu, which is not a good thing for nation building, because we need to remember that a large proportion of Malaysians are not Malays, are not Muslims. They have a right to live under the Malaysian sun with dignity, equal citizenship rights, as enshrined in the Constitution. The other related issue here is religious extremism as propagated by a major Islamist party and its leadership. It's not always been the case. We have found in the past that the Islamist party past has been led by more visionary leaders. And their interpretation of Islam has been more inclusive. Unfortunately, this is not the case with regard to the more recent leadership. And of course, it's not a monolithic entity, PAS, as with all the other political parties. There are factions and divisions, even within PAS, that want serious reform.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Helena?
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope the connection is okay because it's a bit choppy on my side.
It's okay.
Yeah, thanks. I will just quickly mention in relation to the question on the threats here. I won't attempt to identify 3 threats, but I will just talk about in terms, maybe not threats, but maybe some of the sort of mobilization factors for this government. So I think something that needs to be considered very carefully is the role of the youth. Especially in the context of environmental issues and climate change. Because as was previously discussed, and as we all know, sort of a lot of the wind beneath the wings of the Reformasi government has been very youth-oriented. But we see now, the sort of the attention there's quite a lot of attention shifting towards climate change and environmental issues. There were surveys by UNICEF. It said actually 92% of youth think climate change is a very important issue. And other surveys by ISIS, for example, has said that about 60 or to 70% of Malaysians think that the government is not paying enough attention to issues of the climate. So this movement is really very much spearheaded by youth. We see a lot of the climate activism is youth-based. So my point being is that the present administration cannot, afford to continue to sort of lessen the weight that the youth have in this whole equation. One of the questions were related to the Women's March as well. That is also a lot of youth-based, motivation there. So I think this could be something that could potentially take out some of the wind from the sails of Reformasi if they continue to push down the priority of youth-based topics and issues in favor of the more traditional race-based Islamic topics. So I think that's all I will say, because I do realize we're running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we can extend, hopefully with the permission of all the speakers, by 5 to 10 minutes. And I think you guys really talked about the major issues, the generational divide. Although maybe we should caution also the youth is not a monolithic block as well. There are different segments within the youth. The possibility of a Sheraton move, which has been openly hinted at by the opposition today. Although what I would say to that is, again, the problem is this was something that Anwar also did before, or he proposed before when he was in the opposition, 16 September 2008. So I guess no one really has the moral high ground in these sorts of instances. Okay, let's try to see whether we can go through a few other questions. And maybe this is specific to Dr. Nazri. Can this unity government survive a potential Sheraton move? Dr. Lily, will Article 152, 153, will they structurally, will they limit the possibility of reform? Dr. Nazri, yes, please.
Will it survive against another Sheraton move? I think it depends, and at least for now until 2023, when still under the honeymoon period, because we know finally it will be the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the head of state, and the Council of Ruler Majlis Raja-Raja as the final gatekeeper or arbiter. We have seen the change of government since 2018, 4 times at least. All happens in the national palace, in Istana Negara. So they are the gatekeeper. They have just made the decision last November. So for me, they will not, rethink about that, at least in this 2023, even though the opposition might be able, to get the numbers. But once again, also, it's not that it's not as easy as before, as we are now having the hopping laws, whereby if a change of government needed the whole party to change alliance. This is also we have to be reminded as the same move have been done during the transition period from the 14 government to the 15 government in the days before they formed the unity government. We know the Perikatan Nasional had been able to draw certain support from Barisan Nasional and its allies in Sabah and Sarawak, but it was not considered as legal, and there are of course legal constraints for that. The reason why Anwar Zahid collaboration when successful, so they are legal barriers and also gatekeepers. So I think they will survive at least for now, and this 2023 is their platforms or room to enhance their electoral mandate with especially performance mandates. If they can do so this year, and the royal has some sort of approval of their performance, I think they will survive in 2024. So what happened to them next year will depends on their performance this year. But if I can add a bit more, I've argued in 2019 that the current political system in Malaysia is actually quasi-parliamentary and quasi-monarchy, whereby a lot of important decision, not a lot, important decision, change of government happens in National Palace. That is unfortunate. It's supposed to be brought to the parliament. If anything, vote of non-confidence should be done. It is a parliamentary democracy after all, and the constitutional monarchy. It is not the other way around. So I think this is another, heading or direction for reforms in Malaysia. Back to you, Walid.
Thank you, Dr. Nazri. And I think in many ways the palace has been quite restrained in the way that they have exercised their powers. You can imagine that maybe another sultan wouldn't have been as restrained as this particular one. So just a quick follow-up. So you think they will survive the state elections?
In Selangor, Negeri Sembilan, probably yes. But of course, in Kedah, Kelantan, Terengganu, the other way around.
Okay.
Regionalism, once again, yeah.
Right. Thank you so much. Okay. Dr. Lily, we have about 6 minutes left. Yeah, carry on.
Okay. So with regard to Article 152, 153, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but my understanding of Article 153 in particular is that it has been reinterpreted through the decades to justify the prolonging of, say, ethnic-based affirmative action programs such as the new economic policy. The reinterpretation of 153 has led to the interpretation of Ketuanan Melayu Islam in as well. So it's not just Ketuanan Melayu, but Ketuanan Melayu is Islam. Now, and with that, we find this conflation of rights with privilege as well, which some argue was not the vision of the founding fathers. Indeed, the reinterpretation of 153 has resulted in a vision that the founding nationalists would arguably have not been supportive, or would not have been supportive of. Now, it could be argued that this reinterpretation of 153 has contributed to corruption of a grand scale, has contributed to Malaysia being stuck for decades in the middle income trap, when other countries like Malaysia, 2 decades or so ago, were also in the middle income trap but have graduated. So the argument here is that the political economy of Malaysia needs to be reformed in a substantive way, not here and there, but in a substantive manner. I noted earlier the issue of religious and ethnic extremism, often promoted by politicians and others that have benefited from such rhetoric. Now, if we look at the actual figures, the data itself, this ethnic-based affirmative action programs, NEP and others, has led to a dramatic brain drain for the country. Young Malaysians, qualified professional Malaysians, well-educated Malaysians are leaving the country in droves to neighboring countries, Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of the world in search of better jobs, with the possibility of moving ahead without having networks, being close to the elites, and so on. And it's not just the ethnic minorities that have left in droves. Recent statistical data shows that young Malay professionals are also, many of them are beginning to leave the country in significant numbers, particularly to countries like Australia, which is relatively close to Malaysia. So in nation building terms, in political terms, in economic terms, the reinterpretation of 153 away from what I would argue the original spirit of 153 has been perverted to some extent. So they need to go, Malaysians need to go to the drawing board, I believe. Now, politicians often don't want to talk about 153, Pertuanan Melayu Islam, because they are politically sensitive issues, because then the DAP will be accused of being anti-Malay, anti-Islam. The Malay politicians in multiracial parties such as PKR will be accused of being insensitive to Malay interests and so on. But they need to seriously look at this issue. Whether the ethnic-based affirmative action initiatives need to be reformed and revised. This is not to ignore the fact that a disproportionate number of Malays and Bumiputras are in the B 20, 30, 40 group. This is not to, to just say, oh no, Malays are on an equal footing with others. But what needs to be tinkered is the policy implementation, a policy rethinking that is fair and just and gives all Malaysians equal rights and opportunities without ignoring the realities of Malays being recognized as the Malays and Bumiputras as the first Malaysians, so to speak, and also the status of Islam as well. They both, you can do that all at once, but without making Malays and Bumiputras insecure. It is possible. It has been done in many countries around the world. Indonesia is not a perfect example of democratic transition with a level of political stability today. But if we look southwards, we can learn from the Indonesian experiment, a Muslim majority country. We do not want to learn from countries like Afghanistan run by the Taliban, an austere, rigid, doctrinaire form of Islam where women can't even go to school, where the economy is close to collapse. That is the kind of Islam that us, Hadi Awang, seems to be enamored by, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lily. So there's just one question, Dr. Nazri, yes or no only, because we don't have time. So if DPM Zahid is convicted, what are the chances? Will this unity government collapse if Zahid is out of the picture? So does Anwar's premiership rest on Zahid's shoulders?
It will be in between, Dr. Walid. Maybe, maybe.
Okay, that's the safest answer. And on that note, thank you so much, Dr. Lily, Dr. Nazri, Dr. Helena. Thank you to the Sydney Southeast Center, and thank you most of all to the participants. This was really an enjoyable session. Hopefully you all benefited from this, and we went through 1 hour plus without even mentioning Khairi Jamaluddin's name, so well done. Okay,
thank you, yes. Walid, thank you very much.
Okay, no problem. Okay, good afternoon everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Walid. And yeah, if